Once, he was a young man who was admired by many. His face graced the covers of business magazines, his speeches were quoted at global conferences, and his wealth rapidly accumulated from a young age earned him the title the miracle of the century. Born into a devout Christian family, he was raised with values of hard work, discipline, and faith. However, as wealth and power flowed towards him, his faith began to fade, replaced by arrogance and the belief that anything could be conquered with money. One cold, foggy morning, he was about to embark on a trip out of town for an important business meeting. His black sports car sped down the empty highway. But nature had other plans. The thick fog obscured a sharp bend and a large truck that had suddenly stopped due to a flat tire. The brakes screeched, his car swerved sharply, hitting the roadside barrier and tumbling into a small ravine. The impact pinned his body behind the steering wheel, blood flowing from his forehead, and the world seemed to fade slowly. He didn't know how long he was unconscious. When he woke up, his vision was blurry, and his body was immobile. But through the pain and confusion, he saw the silhouette of an old man wearing a long robe, with a white beard, and a tattered turban on his head. The man knelt beside him, whispering foreign words while examining his wounds. The old man's hands were trembling but gentle, wrapping his wounds with strips of cloth and offering him a drink from a small aluminum bottle he carried. "Calm down, my child," the man's voice was deep, full of tranquility. "Allah is still watching over you." Though he didn't fully understand the words, there was something in the tone that was soothing, stronger than all the crisis management and insurance he had ever relied upon. The old imam stayed with him until the rescue team arrived hours later, walking several kilometers to the nearest village to call for help. After the accident, the young man underwent long treatment in the hospital. But his mind couldn't stop thinking about the old imam. He didn't know the man's name, didn't know where he was from, but he remembered the warmth in his eyes and the prayers he continued to utter as his body lay on the side of the ravine. After recovering, he decided to return to that place to search for the Savior who had subtly but profoundly changed him. He eventually found the imam living in a small mosque in a remote village. The imam lived simply, teaching children to read the Qur'an and helping the needy. When they met again, the young man couldn't hold back his tears. He embraced the old man for a long time. "I want to learn about your God," he said, his voice trembling. The old imam smiled. "Our God is the same, only the path may be different. But if you want to know Islam, I will guide you." The journey was not easy. The young man faced many conflicts from his family, his business partners, and even from within himself. But deep in his heart, he felt he had found something that had been missing all this time: humility. The prayers, once foreign to him, now became a source of comfort in the silence. He began to understand that life is not about what one possesses, but about what one gives. Years later, he gave away most of his wealth to build schools, small hospitals, and aid centers in various remote villages. He no longer appeared in magazines, nor did he deliver captivating business speeches. But his heart was at peace, and every day he recited the Shahada with full awareness. On the other hand, the old imam passed away peacefully. On the day of his funeral, the young man stood at the front, leading the prayers while shedding tears. He no longer saw himself as a billionaire, he was just a servant, saved from ruin by the hands of a stranger who showed him the way to God. And since that moment, he knew, behind the ruins, often lies a door leading to the light. A few months after the old imam passed away, the young man remained in the village. He had bought a small piece of land near the prayer room and built a modest house. He never returned to his luxurious home from before. His old world felt distant, even foreign. He found peace in the sound of the azan that echoed softly from the mosque's loudspeaker, in the simplicity of life he led, and in the memories of the old imam who had guided him. However, there was one thing that kept occupying his mind: Asya, the daughter of the old imam. Asya was a simple young woman, yet her eyes held a depth of soul that was extraordinary. She rarely spoke much, but every word she uttered carried gentleness and wisdom. From the start, she treated the young man not as a billionaire or a prominent figure, but as an ordinary person. She took care of him during his recovery after the accident, cooked for him, and occasionally read verses from the Qur'an with a calm voice. She never flirted. Never sought attention. It was precisely because of this that the young man was captivated. One evening after Maghrib, when the sky was starting to darken and the little students had returned home, the young man gathered his courage to speak with Aisya's mother, a gentle and dignified widow. "Mother, allow me to express my intention," he said, bowing respectfully. Aisya's mother gazed at him gently. "What is your intention, son?" "I want to propose to Asya. I know I'm an outsider. I know my past was far from the right path. But I love her, in the way Islam teaches, respectfully, purely, and honestly. I want to protect her as her father once protected me." The elderly woman's eyes welled up with tears. She nodded slowly and said, "If Asya is willing, then I am willing too." A few days later, they were married in a simple ceremony at the courtyard of the prayer room. There were no expensive gowns or grand buildings. But there were hundreds of sincere smiles, prayers from the villagers, and tears of emotion from the little students who came to witness. Asya walked slowly to the wedding platform, wearing a simple white dress and a flowing headscarf. There were no gold jewelry, only a silver ring given by the young man as a dowry. On the day of their wedding, the young man, who now chose a new name as a symbol of his life's transformation, cried silently during his sujud of gratitude. "Father, you have shown me the way. Now, I promise I will protect her and the faith you have passed on." Their days after that were filled with love that grew from worshipping together. Asya stood by his side, managing the schools he had built. He was no longer called the boss or the successful entrepreneur, but simply addressed as Ustaz Muda by the children. He taught ethics and honest business, while Asya mentored the young girls in reading the Qur'an and preserving their modesty. Under the large tree in the courtyard of the mosque where the old imam used to sit and teach, they often sat together, prayed, and reflected on the past. "Who would have thought that the accident would actually save my life?" the husband said one day. Asya smiled, gazing at the evening sky. "Sometimes, Allah destroys our path only to show us His way." And from the ruins, he found not just light but also love. After his marriage, the young man lived simply but with great meaning. He and Asya resided in a small house near the mosque, a house that he built with his own hands, along with the village community. However, during the quiet of long nights and the coolness of early mornings, seeds of ideas began to grow once again in his mind. Not ideas of greed, like before, but a desire to build something that would bring benefit. "What if I start a business here?" he said to Asya one morning after the dawn prayer. "What kind of business?" asked Asya, handing him a warm cup of tea. "Not a big corporation, just a small business, but one that can support the villagers. Maybe skills training, farming, processing local produce, anything that can make them independent and no longer dependent on the city." Asya nodded. "If your intention is for the sake of Allah, inshallah, Allah will bless it." The young man began with small steps. He funded the construction of a simple production house on the outskirts of the village, using his remaining personal funds. He bought grinding machines and packaging equipment, and invited the young men of the village to learn how to process local agricultural products: organic rice, forest honey, cassava chips, coconut oil. But more than that, he founded a business entrepreneurship school, a place where the youth could learn both ethics and business knowledge simultaneously. There was no interest. No deceit. Every transaction was taught to be accompanied by honesty and blessings. He also opened an Islamic cooperative where villagers could borrow business capital without interest, using a murabaha contract that he personally supervised. He rejected any form of practice that came close to riba, even though he was sometimes ridiculed by former colleagues who heard that the billionaire had become a farmer now. But for him, those insults were nothing more than empty songs. Time passed. The village's products began to be recognized in the city. Not because of big promotions, but because of the quality and honesty instilled in the products. The label on the packaging simply read, "From a blessed land." Every profit was set aside to fund scholarships for the students, repair the village roads, and build a free clinic. He never took more than what he needed to live. He channeled the rest back to the community. One day, a former business colleague from his past came to visit. He hardly recognized the young man who used to always wear a suit, now dressed in a long shirt, loose pants, and a white cap. They sat on the porch, surrounded by the aroma of cinnamon and the sounds of children reciting the Qur'an. "To be honest," said the colleague, "you could easily go back to the top. Don't you regret living like this?" The young man smiled, gazing at the golden rice fields in the distance. "I never truly lived when I was at the top. I was just walking aimlessly, searching for something that I found wasn't there. And now I know my purpose in life. I'm not seeking wealth, I'm seeking blessings. And I think I've found it." The colleague was silent for a long time before finally speaking softly, "Teach me from the beginning." In the village, the young man became a teacher, an entrepreneur, and a brother. He was no longer called a billionaire, but as a servant of Allah who works sincerely. And every night, before going to sleep, he would hold Isya's hand and whisper. All of this began from the wreckage of a car and the prayer of an old imam. Years had passed since the young man began his new life. The small village where he had settled had slowly transformed into a center of learning and empowerment. But behind all of these accomplishments, his greatest happiness did not lie in numbers, projects, or awards. It was in the sound of a tiny cry that came one night in their humble home. Their first son was born. He was named Salman, which means peace and tranquility. His first cry seemed like a call to a new future. In the following years, a daughter was also born, and she was named Maryam, after the holy woman he had admired since delving deeper into Islam. As the children began to walk and talk, the young man made one important decision in his life: he wanted to pass down faith, not just assets. Every morning, he would hold little Salman's hand and take him to the mosque, even though the child often dozed off along the way. Every night, Asya would tell stories of the prophets, about the steadfastness of Ibrahim, the kindness of Yusuf, and the courage of Musa. They never forced the children to be great, they simply wanted them to grow into grateful and honest servants of Allah. One day, when Salman was 7 years old, he found an old photo of his father dressed in a suit, standing in front of a private jet. "Father, who is this?" asked Salman innocently. "That was me, son. Before I knew Islam," the young man replied. "Why don't you live like that anymore?" The young man smiled, embraced his son, and said, "Because back then, I was rich but empty. Now, we are simple but complete. And completeness is better than an empty glitter." As the children grew, they became directly involved in the family business. Salman was invited to deliver honey products to the market, not in a fancy car, but on an old motorcycle owned by a villager. Maryam helped Asya in the production kitchen, learning to package neatly, keep daily financial records, and write Bismillah on every product label. It wasn't uncommon for the children to see their father drawing water, cleaning the mosque's toilet, or carrying rice to an elderly widow's house. They didn't understand why their father, once famous and rich, now did such small things. But over time, they learned, honor does not come from what we own, but from what we give. In his old age, the young man now called Abuya by the students and the village children wrote a message for his children. "Children, do not inherit my wealth if it makes you arrogant. But inherit my faith and my hard work. Build the world, but do not forget the hereafter. Be entrepreneurs, but first be servants of Allah." Today, Salman is a teacher and entrepreneur just like his father. Maryam runs an entrepreneurship training program for young Muslim women, providing them with capital and encouragement to become independent. In the old production house, which has now been expanded, a plaque hangs on the wall. From the wreckage of a car, a family was born that builds the community. And every morning, before opening their business, they still gather in the small mosque at the edge of the village. Together, they prostrate, just as the father once did in his pain but found his life once again. Time, like a gentle breeze, carries the years of the young man who has now become an old man. His hair is turning white, his body is not as strong as before, but the spark in his eyes still holds the same light, the light of a man who once lost everything, only to find God. He no longer frequents the production house. Now, he spends most of his time sitting in the mosque's porch, teaching children to recite the Qur'an, offering advice to the village youth, or simply gazing at the rice fields while twirling a prayer bead in his hand. Salman and Maryam have fully taken over the family business, but they continue to uphold the principles taught by their father: honesty, trustworthiness, and blessings above all. One afternoon, Abuya called his family to gather. Asya, Salman, Maryam, and his grandchildren sat around him. The soft breeze carried the scent of wet grass and the sound of small birds returning to their nests. "My children," Abuya spoke softly, "perhaps not long from now, I will return to the true home." Everyone fell silent. Asya grasped his hand tightly. She knew her husband's age was catching up with him, but she was never ready to let go of the man who had guided her with patience and faith all this time. Abuya continued, "Wealth can disappear. A business can collapse. But if you inherit faith, honesty, and love for the people, then you have inherited true wealth." He looked at his young grandchildren and whispered, "Be a good person, my child. Not a great one." A few months later, on a quiet night, Abuya passed away. He died while in prostration during the last rakat of Tahajjud prayer. His face was peaceful. Beside him was a small, worn-out Qur'an, with pages marked by the verses he often read. "Indeed, those who say, 'Our Lord is Allah,' and then remain steadfast, the angels will descend upon them." His funeral was simple, just as he wanted. But hundreds came. Orphans cried. Farmers, small entrepreneurs, and students prayed in sobs. Everyone knew, a servant of God had returned in glory. Years passed. Salman and Maryam continued their father's struggle. They expanded the free school, opened online courses for Sharia entrepreneurship, and even published books from Abuya's diaries about honesty in business and his spiritual journey. Abuya's grandchildren grew up with stories about the grandfather who was once a billionaire but chose to live in a village. They didn't inherit a giant corporation or international shares, but they grew up with pride and identity. They were the descendants of someone who had fallen, then risen with Islam. At the entrance of the family production house, there was a phrase that had now become their business and life motto. "Work not for this world, but to make this world a field for the hereafter." And at the corner of the small mosque courtyard where Abuya used to sit, there was an empty wooden chair, facing the rice fields. Above it, it read, "The seed of a servant who once fell and chose to rise with Allah." This story ends on earth, but its legacy flows in the sky like the prayers of righteous children, ongoing charity, and knowledge practiced by generations yet to come. And behind all of that, one car wreck changed everything. After Abuya's departure, Salman and Maryam not only lost a father but also their life compass. Yet, they both knew, their father had never truly left. His values lived in every step they took, every decision they made, and every prayer they uttered. Salman grew into a mature young man, calm like his father, but more fluent in the language of technology and the times. He understood that the world had changed. The market was no longer just in the village but also on mobile screens. With caution and much istikara, prayer for guidance, Salman decided to take their local products into the digital realm. But he had one condition. This business must remain Sharia compliant. Don't sell promises. Don't deceive with an image. Don't overdo endorsements. And most importantly, don't forget zakat. He formed a small team from the young people in the village, teaching them design, digital marketing, and customer service. He didn't choose them for their degrees, but for their character. In every weekly meeting, Salman always began with a prayer and recited a verse from the Qur'an related to ethics in work. Before long, their product's social media account gained widespread attention. But not because of paid virality, rather, because of authenticity. honest service, and the story of how the product came from a small village once built by a former billionaire who had embraced Islam. One day, a big investor from the city came and offered a major partnership. We can help expand, even export. But there needs to be a system adjustment. The product needs to be polished to be more commercial. We can tweak the narrative a little to make it more marketable. Salman looked at him calmly and said, "If we have to turn honesty into manipulation, we'd rather stay in the village." The investor left. And in silence, Salman knew his father must be smiling from the hereafter. Meanwhile, Maryam grew into a figure very much like her mother, gentle but steadfast. She was a graduate of an Islamic university but chose to stay in the village and develop the Independent Muslimah program, a place where girls learn to sew, cook, manage home businesses, while maintaining modesty and good character. She often told her students, "Being a Muslimah doesn't mean staying silent. It means speaking through deeds. Becoming a mother doesn't mean stopping learning. It means becoming a living school." Maryam also started writing, following in her father's footsteps with his daily journal. She wrote a book titled Business Without Letting Go of the Hijab, which became an inspiration for many young Muslimah in big cities. But her struggle wasn't easy. She was often ridiculed for choosing a traditional path and not pursuing a brilliant career in the capital. Some of her old friends even mocked her as too old-fashioned. Maryam simply smiled. "If being old-fashioned means I am safeguarding my religion and my dignity, then let me be an old tree that provides shade rather than a fake flower that wilts quickly." In a touching moment, Salman and Maryam stood together in front of their father's grave. Salman spoke softly, "You know, sis, Dad never forced us to be like him. But he made us love what he fought for." Maryam smiled, tears flowing down her cheeks. "And now, we are preserving his legacy. Not just the business but that light. Now, the village has become a center for education and empowerment for the Ummah. People from the city come to learn, not to teach. And in the middle of it all, the two siblings Salman and Maryam stand as guardians of an unwritten legacy, faith that is practiced, not just spoken. They prove that the younger generation can hold the world without losing the heavens. One bright morning, the village where Salman and Maryam lived was suddenly shaken by a major piece of news. A large agribusiness company, known throughout the country, announced plans to buy all the surrounding farmland in their village. The company promised to bring progress, with modernized farming, advanced technology, and better infrastructure. However, there was one thing that surprised the villagers: the company was offering a price far above the market value. They began to tempt the villagers with large sums of money in exchange for selling their land. Most of the villagers were confused, while others were enticed by the offer. A strong urge to get rich quickly started to infiltrate their minds. Salman and Maryam heard the news and immediately gathered the villagers for a meeting at the mosque. They wanted to ensure that the decisions made by the village would not sacrifice the principles they had been fighting for all along. "What we have been preserving all this time is not just land, but also a legacy. If we sell this land, what will we leave for our children and grandchildren?" said Salman firmly. However, some villagers began to question, "But if we reject this offer, we will miss out on progress. We will remain in a small village without the facilities and technology they're offering." Maryam responded gently, "The progress we seek is not the kind that makes us abandon our principles. True progress must go hand in hand with faith and local wisdom. This land is not just land, it is where our prayers were once offered, where our Father built everything. We must be brave enough to resist temptations that sacrifice our values." Yet, the pressure from outside grew stronger. The tempting offer, the promised facilities, they began to shake the villagers' convictions. Even some people who were once close to Salman and Maryam started to doubt their stance. "What do you expect? The world keeps moving. If we don't adapt, we will be left behind," said one of the village leaders who had decided to sell his land. "Other villagers have already accepted the offer. They can't wait forever." Salman and Maryam felt betrayed. They knew that if the land was sold, their father's efforts to preserve the blessings of life would be in vain. They felt this was the biggest test of their lives. That night, in their modest home, Salman and Maryam sat together, speaking in silence. "Should we give up, sis?" Salman asked quietly. "Everyone seems so captivated by the offer. I even feel like I'm starting to doubt. Is this test too heavy?" Maryam looked out the window, seeing the stars beginning to appear. She held Salman's hand and said with full confidence, "Remember what Father taught us, there is nothing better than seeking blessings in every step we take, not just fleeting success. Allah will never leave His servants who strive to maintain their faith and principles." Salman lowered his head, reflecting. "But what if we lose everything? What if the villagers start leaving us?" Maryam looked at her brother gently. "Maybe we can't change their minds, but we can keep our intentions pure. We are not seeking worldly victory, but we are striving to keep our hearts sincere. We will be firm, but with love. If they choose another path, that is their fate. But we will continue on the right path." The next day, Salman gathered the villagers for a final meeting. He spoke firmly, yet with love. "Fellow villagers, we all know how hard life is in this simple place. But what will we gain if we sell this land? The money we receive could be gone in an instant. However, if we keep this land, we will preserve the blessings inherited from our father. There is no wealth more valuable than the blessings of Allah. Let's not be tempted by an offer that would destroy what we have built." Maryam stood next to Salman and said, "This decision is not just about land. It's about our future as Muslims. We must be brave enough to choose the path of blessings, even if that path isn't always easy." The debate was intense, but eventually, after reflecting, most of the villagers decided to reject the offer. They knew that although they wouldn't get rich overnight, the blessings that came from Allah were far more valuable than mere material wealth. However, a few days later, the threat came. The big company began approaching Salman and Maryam directly. They offered a large contract, with an enormous financial offer, if they were willing to cooperate. Additionally, they subtly threatened that the company might take its development to another region, which could jeopardize their business in the village. Salman and Maryam felt cornered, but they remained steadfast in their principles. After praying and seeking guidance through istikhara, Salman made a difficult decision. "If Allah helps us, no one can defeat us. If not, we surrender everything to His will," Salman said to Maryam. With full confidence, they rejected the offer, knowing this would be a major test for their family business. They decided to hold on to the principles they believed in, that true blessings in life only come through honesty and devotion to Allah. Several months later, despite facing great difficulties, Salman and Maryam's family business not only survived but thrived. They began receiving support from various parties who appreciated their efforts to remain steadfast in their principles. The land they had preserved with all their heart continued to be a source of blessings. Their products became more widely known for their quality and honesty. Villagers who had once been skeptical now saw how they had gained not only worldly profit but also blessings in every step they took. Salman and Maryam's family had gone through a trial that tested their faith and principles, but with determination, they succeeded in preserving what was most important, blessings in life and an invaluable legacy. Now, they lead with hearts, not only with hard-working hands but with faith that drives them.